Welcome to the channel Stories of Slavery. The story we bring you today is from 1855, about Iron Dillard. She was a black girl, the girl fire could not burn. What happened to her had no explanation, no logic, no record that made sense. This is a heavy story. Take a breath, listen carefully. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel and comment the city and country you're listening from. Your presence keeps these stories alive instead of forgotten. Let's begin. In the winter of 1855, something occurred on the Whitmore plantation in Colleton County, South Carolina, that would be whispered about for generations. A fire consumed the main house and spread across the property in a pattern that investigators later called impossible. The flames moved with what one witness described as deliberate intention. They devoured the overseer's quarters. They turned the cotton storehouse to ash. They reduced the punishment shed to a memory. But somehow, inexplicably, the slave cabins were left completely untouched. That night, 43 enslaved people vanished. The plantation owner survived, but the next morning he was found wandering the smoking ruins, his body covered in burned scars shaped like letters' initials. 37 sets of initials burned into his flesh. He never spoke again, not one coherent word for the rest of his life. When authorities asked the remaining witnesses what had happened, they all gave the same answer. They said the fire walked. They said it followed a girl, a 12-year-old girl who moved through the flames as if walking through rain. This is the story of that girl. This is the story of Esther Dillard, the one they called Iron, the girl fire could not burn. To understand what happened that December night, we need to go back 12 years. We need to return to the moment Esther came into the world. The Whitmore plantation sat on 300 acres of low country land about 40 miles southwest of Charleston. In 1843, the year Esther was born, the plantation held 112 enslaved people and produced roughly 400 bales of cotton each year. The owner, Randolph Whitmore, was 41 years old and considered himself a progressive master. He gave his slaves 1 day of rest per week. He let them keep small garden plots behind their cabins. He even hired a doctor to visit the property twice a year to examine the workforce. In Randolph Whitmore's mind, these small mercies made him a good man. The people he owned knew otherwise. Esther's mother was a woman named Lily. She was 23 when she gave birth and worked in the main house as a domestic servant. Lily was known for her quiet nature and careful movements. She had learned early that survival meant invisibility. The less the white folks noticed you, the safer you were. She kept her eyes down. She answered with as few words as possible. She made herself small, useful, and forgettable. For 6 years, that strategy kept her alive. The night Esther was born, a storm rolled across the low country. Witnesses remembered lightning striking the old oak tree near the slave quarters 3 times in a row. Mama Zora, the oldest woman on the plantation, was 78 that year, and she had delivered more babies than she could count. She was the one who caught Esther as she came into the world, and she was the first to notice that something was different about this child. The baby did not cry. Most newborns announced their arrival with screaming. Esther simply opened her eyes and looked around the room as if taking inventory. Mama Zora would later say the child's eyes held an old soul, a soul that had seen things, a soul that remembered. But what truly disturbed Mama Zora happened moments after the birth. A candle on the windowsill had been knocked over during the delivery. The flame caught the edge of the blanket Lily was lying on. In the chaos, no one noticed until the fire was already spreading. Mama Zora grabbed the newborn to pull her away from danger, but Esther had already rolled toward the flames. Her tiny hand reached out and touched the fire directly. Mama Zora screamed. She was sure she would find the baby's hand destroyed. Instead, the child was perfectly unharmed. The fire had gone out the moment Esther touched it. The baby's skin showed no burns, no redness, nothing. Mama Zora was from the Gullah people. Her grandmother had been brought to America from the region that is now Sierra Leone. She had been raised on stories of spirits and ancestors, of children born with gifts from the other side. She looked at baby Esther and recognized something. She told no one what she had seen. Some things she understood were too dangerous to speak aloud. For the first 5 years of Esther's life, nothing unusual happened, or at least nothing anyone noticed. Lily raised her daughter in the small cabin she shared with 2 other women and their children. Esther was a quiet child, much like her mother. She watched more than she spoke. She listened more than she asked. The other children on the plantation found her strange. She would sit for hours staring at cooking fires, at candles, at the lanterns outside the overseer's office. Fire seemed to fascinate her in a way that made adults uncomfortable. When Esther was 5, an event happened that would change everything. It was August 1848. The summer had been brutal, with temperatures over 100 degrees F for weeks at a time. The slave cabins were poorly ventilated, built with gaps that let in winter cold, but did nothing to relieve summer heat. On the night of August 17th, a cooking fire that hadn't been properly extinguished flared up inside one of the cabins. The flames spread quickly through the dry wooden structure. 7 people were sleeping inside, including Esther and her mother. Lily woke to the smell of smoke. The cabin was already filled with it, thick, black, and choking. She could hear screaming from the other families. She grabbed for Esther, but her daughter was not beside her. In the confusion and darkness, Lily couldn't find her child. She was forced to flee the burning structure, certain her daughter was dead. The cabin burned for nearly an hour. When the flames finally died down, the enslaved community gathered around the smoking ruins to mourn. 6 people had escaped. 1 person was missing, little Esther, age 5, presumed dead. Then something impossible happened. The ashes shifted. A small figure sat up in the middle of the destruction. Esther stood up completely naked. Her clothes had burned away, but her body was untouched. She was covered in soot, but showed no burns, no blisters, no injuries of any kind. She walked out of the ashes toward her mother, who collapsed to her knees in shock. The witnesses did not know what to make of what they had seen. Some believed it was a miracle from God. Others believed it was the devil's work. Mama Zora said nothing, but she watched the child with new intensity. The news reached Randolph Whitmore by morning. The plantation owner came to see the girl for himself. He examined her skin, looking for evidence of burns or tricks. He found nothing. The child stood before him, small and silent, meeting his gaze in a way that enslaved children were taught never to do. Whitmore was a practical man. He did not believe in miracles or devils. He believed in science, logic, and the natural order of things. What he had heard was impossible, which meant there had to be an explanation. The child must have escaped before the fire spread. The witnesses must have been confused. The story must have grown in the telling, but something about the girl unsettled him, the way she looked at him, the steadiness in her eyes. He made a decision that would define the next 7 years of Esther's life. He decided to test her. The first test happened that same day. Whitmore ordered a small fire built in the yard outside the slave quarters. He told his overseer, a man named Thomas Garrett, to bring the girl forward. Lily screamed and begged, but she was held back. Whitmore told the child to put her hand in the fire. Esther looked at him for a long moment. Then she walked forward and placed both hands directly into the flames. She did not scream. She did not flinch. She held her hands in the fire for nearly a minute, while everyone watched in stunned silence. When she withdrew them, her palms were not even warm to the touch. Whitmore's practical mind struggled to process what he had witnessed. He would spend the next 7 years trying to understand it. He would fail. From that day forward, Randolph Whitmore became obsessed with the girl. He gave her a new name. He called her Iron. It was meant as mockery, a reference to the folk belief that iron could ward off evil spirits. If the devil protected this child, Whitmore reasoned, perhaps iron could break whatever spell she was under. The name stuck. The enslaved community adopted it, though for different reasons. To them, iron was not an insult. It was a testament to strength. It was a reminder that something powerful lived among them, something even the master could not destroy. The tests continued. Whitmore subjected Iron to increasingly cruel experiments over the following years. He made her hold hot coals. He made her touch branding irons fresh from the forge. He once ordered her locked in the smokehouse for 3 days, surrounded by controlled fires. Each time iron emerged unharmed, each time Whitmore's frustration grew. What disturbed him most was not the girl's apparent immunity to fire. It was her demeanor. She never cried, she never begged, she simply endured, watching him with those steady eyes that seemed to see straight through him. Sometimes, after a particularly brutal test, Whitmore would wake in the middle of the night, convinced that the girl was standing at the foot of his bed. She never was, but the feeling persisted. The enslaved community developed their own theories about iron. Some believed she was protected by African spirits. Others thought she was a sign from God that deliverance was coming. A few, mostly those who had converted to Christianity and abandoned the old beliefs, thought she was dangerous and should be avoided. But almost everyone agreed on one thing: there was something about this child that defied explanation. Mama Zora kept her own counsel, but on Iron's 7th birthday, she called the girl to her cabin and began to teach her. Mama Zora was the keeper of memory on the Whitmore plantation. She remembered the old stories, the ones passed down from generation to generation, stretching back to Africa. Most of the younger people had forgotten these stories or dismissed them as superstition, but Mama Zora understood that stories were more than entertainment. They were survival, they were identity, they were a bridge to a past that slavery tried to erase. She told Iron about Ogun. In the Yoruba tradition, Ogun was the spirit of iron and fire, the divine blacksmith who cleared paths through the wilderness. He was a warrior spirit, fierce and uncompromising, associated with justice and the protection of the oppressed. Mama Zora explained that sometimes, in times of great suffering, Ogun would send his blessing to certain children. These children would be marked by fire. They would be immune to its destruction because they carried its power inside them. Iron listened without comment. She didn't know if she believed them, but she recognized something in those stories that felt true. She had always known she was different. Now she was beginning to understand why. Mama Zora also taught her something practical: how to control it. The old woman had observed Iron carefully over the years. She had noticed that the girl's power was not simply passive immunity. It was active, even if Iron didn't realize it. Small fires would extinguish themselves when Iron became calm. They would flare up when she became angry or frightened. The gift was connected to her emotions, to her will. Mama Zora believed it could be developed. The training happened in secret, late at night when the plantation was asleep. Mama Zora would light a small candle and have Iron practice controlling the flame with her mind. At first, nothing happened, but over weeks and months, Iron began to feel something. A connection, a thread between herself and the fire, as real as a rope in her hands. She learned to make the flame grow larger. She learned to make it shrink. She learned to move it, to shape it, to bend it to her will. She told no one what she was learning, not even her mother. Some things, Mama Zora warned, were too dangerous to share. If the master ever discovered that Iron could not only survive fire but command it, there was no telling what he might do. The years passed. Iron grew from a child into a young girl, and the plantation continued its brutal rhythm. Cotton was planted in the spring, cultivated through the summer, harvested in the fall. The enslaved worked from sunrise to sunset, their lives measured in pounds of cotton picked and bales produced. The system was designed to extract maximum labor while spending minimum resources on the people who provided that labor. It was efficient, it was profitable, it was evil. Iron worked in the field starting at age 8. By 10, she was expected to pick 50 pounds of cotton per day. By 12, that quota had risen to 100 pounds. The work was back-breaking, the conditions dangerous. Cotton plants have sharp edges that cut hands and arms. The South Carolina sun was merciless. Dehydration, heat stroke, and exhaustion claimed lives every summer. But through it all, Iron endured. She developed a reputation as a steady worker, not the fastest, but never failing to meet her quota. She kept to herself, speaking little, watching everything. The other enslaved people respected her but also feared her slightly. They had not forgotten what she was, what she could do. Thomas Garrett, the overseer, particularly disliked Iron. He was a violent man who took pleasure in punishment, and Iron's immunity to certain forms of discipline infuriated him. He could not burn her. When he tried to whip her, the wounds would heal overnight, leaving no scars. It was as if her body rejected any permanent marking. Garrett interpreted this as defiance. He looked for other ways to hurt her. When Iron was 11, Garrett discovered her weakness. He could not harm Iron directly, but he could harm the people she loved. One evening, Garrett caught Iron speaking with a boy named Samuel. They were just talking, sharing a few minutes of rest after the day's work. But Garrett claimed they were planning something. He dragged Samuel to the punishment post and whipped him bloody while Iron was forced to watch. The message was clear. She might be untouchable, but the people around her were not. From that day forward, Iron understood that her gift was also a burden. Her immunity protected only her. Everyone she cared about remained vulnerable. This knowledge would shape every decision she made in the years to come. By 1855, the world outside the Whitmore plantation was changing. The tension between North and South over slavery had reached a breaking point. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 had made it a federal crime to assist runaway slaves, even in states where slavery was illegal. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 had opened new territories to slavery, sparking violent conflicts between pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers. The country was moving toward war, though few could see it clearly yet. Inside the plantation, these distant events seemed almost unreal. The enslaved heard rumors and fragments of news, but their daily reality remained unchanged. They planted and picked and survived, generation after generation, waiting for a freedom that might never come. Lily, Iron's mother, was 35 years old in 1855. The years of labor had aged her beyond her years. Her hands were permanently calloused, her back bent from decades of bending over cotton plants. But she had survived, and she had kept her daughter alive. In the brutal calculus of slavery, this counted as success. In the spring of that year, something happened that set the final events in motion. The plantation's head cook, a woman named Bessie, was caught hiding food. She had been taking small amounts from the kitchen to feed her grandson, a sickly boy who wasn't getting enough nutrition. It was a minor theft by any reasonable standard, but Randolph Whitmore did not tolerate theft of any kind. He decided to make an example of her. Bessie was given 50 lashes. She was 62 years old. She did not survive. The enslaved community mourned in silence. They had no power to protest, no recourse to justice. But the anger and grief rippled through the quarters, adding to years of accumulated pain. Iron felt it intensely. Bessie had been kind to her as a child. She had slipped her extra food when no one was looking. She had told her stories about her grandmother in Africa. Now she was dead, killed for the crime of feeding a hungry child. That night, Iron could not sleep. She lay in her cabin, staring at the ceiling, and felt something shifting inside her. The fire that lived within her, that she had learned to control and contain, was pushing against its boundaries. It wanted out, it wanted to burn. Mama Zora came to her. The old woman was 89 now, frail and nearly blind, but she still knew things. She could still sense when the spirits were moving. She told Iron that the time was coming. She didn't know exactly when or how, but she could feel it. A reckoning was approaching. Iron would have to choose what kind of person she wanted to be. She could use her gift for destruction, burning everything and everyone who had hurt her. Or she could use it for something greater. She could use it to save her people. Iron did not respond. She wasn't ready to make that choice. Not yet. 2 weeks later, her mother was accused of theft. The accusation came from Cornelius, the plantation's black overseer. Cornelius was a complicated figure in the hierarchy. He was an enslaved man who had been given authority over other enslaved people. He carried a whip. He reported infractions to the master. He enforced discipline. In exchange, he received better food, better housing, and a measure of protection from the worst abuses. Many of the other enslaved despised him. They saw him as a traitor, a man who had sold his soul for scraps from the master's table. Cornelius claimed he had seen Lily stealing flour from the kitchen storehouse. The evidence was flimsy. No flour was found in Lily's possession, but Randolph Whitmore trusted his black overseer. It was convenient to have a black man enforce discipline on black bodies. It created division among the enslaved population. It made them distrust each other. It was a strategy as old as slavery itself. Whitmore decided that Lily would be sold, not whipped, not punished on the plantation, but sold to a trader who would take her to the Mississippi cotton fields. This was in many ways a fate worse than death. The Mississippi plantations were notorious for their brutality. Life expectancy for enslaved people there was measured in single-digit years, and Lily would be separated from her daughter forever. The sale was scheduled for June 10, 1855. Iron learned of the decision the night before. She found her mother in their cabin, packing the few possessions she was allowed to take. Lily was not crying. She had moved beyond tears into a kind of numb acceptance. This was the reality of their lives. Families were separated, mothers were torn from children. Love was a liability because it gave the masters one more weapon to use against you. Iron did not accept it. For the first time in her life, she felt the full power of her gift rising within her. It was not a gentle warmth, but a roaring furnace demanding release. She could burn the entire plantation to the ground. She could kill Whitmore and Garrett and everyone who had made their lives a living hell. She could have her revenge. But Mame Zora's words echoed in her mind. Destruction was easy. Building something better was hard. If she simply burned everything, what would happen to the 100 other enslaved people on this plantation? What would happen to the children? What would happen to the old and sick who could not run? Her revenge would consume them along with her enemies. She made a decision. She would not simply destroy, she would liberate. That night, Iron began to plan. She went first to Solomon, the plantation blacksmith. Solomon was 53 years old and had lived on the Whitmore plantation for 30 years. He was skilled at his trade, valuable enough that Whitmore had never considered selling him, but Solomon carried deep wounds. 15 years earlier, his wife and 2 sons had been sold to pay off Whitmore's gambling debts. He had never recovered from that loss. He did his work mechanically, spoke to no one, and waited for death. Iron found him in the forge, working late on a set of horseshoes. She told him what she was planning. She told him about her gift. She showed him, creating a flame in her palm and letting it dance between her fingers. Solomon watched without expression. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. Then he asked her one question: could she really get people out? Not just herself, but everyone who wanted to go. Iron told him the truth. She did not know, but she was going to try. Solomon nodded slowly. For the first time in 15 years, something flickered in his eyes, something that looked almost like hope. He would help her. He would forge what they needed: keys, tools, weapons if necessary, but he warned her about something. He warned her about Cornelius. The black overseer was dangerous, Solomon said, not because he was strong or smart, but because he was desperate. He had built his entire identity around his position. If the slaves escaped, if the plantation fell, Cornelius would lose everything. He would fight to preserve the system that gave him power, even though that system enslaved him too. Iron thanked Solomon for the warning, but she had already known about Cornelius. She had known for years. What she did not know yet was the truth about his connection to her. The planning took time. Iron could not simply announce her intentions. She had to identify who would be willing to run and who might betray them. She had to map escape routes. She had to coordinate timing, and she had to keep her mother from being sold while she put everything in place. The last part proved impossible. On June 10th, as scheduled, a slave trader arrived at the Whitmore plantation. His name was Marcus Webb, and he operated throughout the Deep South, buying and selling human beings like livestock. He had come for Lily and 3 other enslaved people Whitmore had decided to sell. Iron watched from the fields as her mother was led to the wagon. Lily looked back once, found her daughter in the crowd, and held her gaze. No words were spoken, none were needed. In that look was everything: love, grief, a desperate prayer that her daughter would survive. Then Lily was loaded into the wagon pulled away, and Iron's mother disappeared down the road toward Mississippi. Iron stood frozen, the fire inside her surged and screamed. She could feel it trying to escape, trying to reach out and stop the wagon, trying to burn everything in its path. It took every ounce of control she had to hold it back. She could not act now, not in daylight, surrounded by overseers with guns. She would die and save no one. That night, something changed in Iron. The girl who had endured 7 years of tests, who had watched and waited and learned to control herself, was gone. In her place was something harder, something colder, something that had made a decision. She would not just escape. She would not just liberate her people. She would make Randolph Whitmore pay for every life he had destroyed. She would make him understand exactly what he had done, and she would do it in a way he would never forget. The next morning, Iron went to Mommy Zora one final time. The old woman was dying. She had held on for years, sustained by sheer will and the knowledge that she had one more task to complete. Now, with Iron standing before her, she could feel that task coming to its end. She told Iron the last piece of the story, the part she had held back for 12 years. On the night Iron was born, during that terrible storm, Mommy Zora had seen something. When the lightning struck the oak tree 3 times, she had seen a figure standing beneath it. A figure made of flame, shaped like a man, but burning with impossible intensity. The figure had looked toward the cabin where Lily was giving birth. Then it had nodded once, as if confirming something, and then it had disappeared. Mama Zora believed she had seen Ogun himself, the spirit of iron and fire, the warrior who clears paths, come to witness the birth of one of his children. He had marked Iron for a purpose, not just survival, not just personal power, but liberation. Iron listened. She didn't know if she believed in Ogun. She didn't know if she believed in anything beyond the reality of her own experience. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was going to free her people. She was going to burn down the system that enslaved them. And she was going to find her mother, no matter how long it took. Mommy Zora smiled. She reached out and touched Iron's face with her withered hand. She told Iron that she had been waiting her whole life for this moment. She had been brought to this plantation 60 years ago, stolen from her family in Africa, and she had survived everything they threw at her. She had survived because she knew deep in her bones that someone was coming, someone who would set things right. Now that someone was here, Mommy Zora could finally rest. She died that night, peacefully, with a smile on her face. The enslaved community buried her beneath the oak tree where Ogun had appeared. Iron stood at the grave as the sun rose and made a silent promise. She would honor Mommy Zora's faith. She would honor her ancestors. She would become the warrior they had prayed for. The fire inside her burned steady and strong, waiting to be unleashed. December was 6 months away. Iron had work to do. The months between June and December of 1855 were the most intense of Iron's young life. She was 12 years old, a child by any normal measure, but nothing about her circumstances or her responsibilities was normal. She was planning the largest escape in the history of Colleton County. She was preparing to challenge a system that had endured for 200 years. And she was doing it all while maintaining the appearance of an obedient slave. The first priority was recruitment. Iron needed to identify who would run and who could be trusted. This was dangerous work. One wrong choice, one person who decided to betray the group for favor with the master, and everyone would die. She started with the people she knew best, the women who had shared cabins with her mother, the children she had grown up with, the older workers who had shown her small kindnesses over the years. She approached each one carefully, testing their reactions before revealing anything specific. The responses varied. Some people were eager, desperate for any chance at freedom. Others were terrified, convinced that escape was impossible and that trying would only make things worse. A few refused even to discuss the possibility, too broken by years of abuse to imagine anything different. Iron did not pressure anyone. She made her case simply and honestly. She told them about her gift, demonstrated it when necessary, explained her plan in broad strokes. Then she let them decide. By September, she had 43 confirmed participants, men, women, and children ranging in age from 6 to 72. It was more than she had hoped for. It was also more than she had planned for. Moving that many people without detection would be extraordinarily difficult. The second priority was the route. Iron studied the geography of the area obsessively. She learned which roads were patrolled and when. She identified rivers and swamps that could provide cover. She located the stations of the Underground Railroad, the secret network of safe houses that helped escaped slaves reach the north. The closest reliable station was in Georgetown, about 50 miles northeast of the plantation. A free black family named the Washingtons operated out of their home there, sheltering runaways and connecting them with guides who could take them farther north. If Iron could get her group to Georgetown, they would have a chance. But 50 miles was a long way on foot, especially with children and elderly people. They would need supplies, rest stops, contingency plans. Iron worked through the details methodically, trying to anticipate every problem. The third priority was dealing with Cornelius. The black overseer had become more aggressive since Lily's sale. He seemed to sense that something was changing among the enslaved population. He watched Iron with particular intensity, looking for evidence of whatever he suspected. Iron avoided him as much as possible, but on a plantation, complete avoidance was impossible. In October, Cornelius confronted her. He found her alone near the edge of the cotton fields during the brief break between afternoon work and the evening meal. He told her that he knew she was planning something. He didn't know what, but he could feel it. The air on the plantation felt different. People were whispering. He was going to find out what was happening, and when he did, there would be consequences. Iron looked at him steadily. She asked him why he cared. He was enslaved just like them. Whitmore could sell him tomorrow if he wanted. All his power, all his privilege could be taken away in an instant. Why did he fight so hard to protect a system that saw him as property? Cornelius's face twisted with something between anger and pain. He told her she did not understand. He told her that survival was all that mattered. The strong survived by any means necessary. The weak were crushed. That was the way of the world, and no amount of wishful thinking would change it. Iron said nothing. She just looked at him with those steady eyes that had unnerved Randolph Whitmore for 7 years. After a long moment, Cornelius turned and walked away. But their conversation was not finished. A week later, Iron learned the truth about Cornelius, and it changed everything. Solomon the blacksmith was the one who told her. He had debated whether to share this information. It was not his secret to tell, but he had decided that Iron deserved to know the truth before she made her final plans. Cornelius was her father. 13 years earlier, before Cornelius had become an overseer, he and Lily had been involved. It was not a romance. Romance was almost impossible under slavery, but they had found comfort in each other. Two young people trying to survive an inhuman system. When Lily became pregnant, Cornelius made a choice. He distanced himself from her. He threw himself into earning the master's trust. He climbed the brutal hierarchy until he reached the position of overseer. He did it, Solomon said, because he was terrified. He thought that by gaining power, he could protect himself. Maybe he even thought he could protect his child from a distance. But the price of that power was his soul. He became the thing he had feared, an enforcer of the very system that enslaved him. Iron absorbed this in silence. She thought about all the times Cornelius had watched her with that strange intensity. She had assumed it was suspicion or hostility. Now she understood it was something more complicated. Guilt, shame, a desperate, twisted kind of love that had been poisoned by fear. It did not change her plans. Cornelius had made his choices. He had helped sell her mother. He had whipped and brutalized her people for years. Whatever might have been possible between them, whatever relationship they might have had, was buried under mountains of suffering. She would not forgive him, she would not save him, but she would not kill him either, not unless he gave her no choice. November arrived, and with it the harvest. The cotton had to be picked, processed, and baled for market. The work was exhausting 16-hour days that left the enslaved barely able to stand. Iron pushed through it, conserving her strength for what was coming. She had chosen the date, December 17th, 1855. It was a Saturday, which meant the enslaved would have Sunday to rest, giving them extra hours before their absence was noticed. It was also the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. More darkness meant more time to travel. In the final weeks, Iron refined her plan. The escape would begin at midnight. She would create a distraction, using her gift to start fires in strategic locations around the plantation. While the overseers and Whitmore dealt with the chaos, the escapees would gather at a predetermined point near the northern edge of the property. From there, they would move quickly toward Georgetown. Iron would cover their retreat, staying behind, managing the fires, ensuring that no one could follow. When the group was safely away, she would catch up to them. Her immunity to fire meant she could move through burning areas that would stop any pursuer. But before she left, she had one final task to complete. Randolph Whitmore was going to learn what it felt like to be marked, to be branded, to carry permanent reminders of his sins on his flesh. Iron had been planning this part carefully. She had memorized the names of every person Whitmore had sold, every family he had separated, every life he had destroyed. 37 people, 37 sets of initials. They would be burned into his skin forever. It was not murder. Whitmore would survive, at least physically, but he would never forget what he had done, and everyone who saw him would know that he had been judged. The night of December 16th, Iron visited the grave beneath the oak tree one final time. She knelt in the cold grass and spoke to Mama Zora. She told her that tomorrow was the day. She asked for her blessing and her guidance. She promised that she would not fail. The wind picked up, rustling the bare branches of the oak. For just a moment, Iron thought she felt a hand on her shoulder. When she turned, there was no one there, but she felt comforted nonetheless. She returned to her cabin and lay down to rest. Tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow she would either win her freedom or die trying. Tomorrow the Whitmore plantation would burn. December 17th, 1855, began like any other winter day on the Whitmore plantation. The temperature hovered just above freezing when the morning bell rang at 5:30. The enslaved workers emerged from their cabins into the gray dawn, breath visible in the cold air, and made their way to their assigned tasks. Winter meant reduced fieldwork but increased labor in other areas, equipment to repair, buildings to maintain, livestock to tend. The plantation never truly rested. Iron moved through her morning routines with careful precision. She could not afford to do anything that might attract attention. Not today. She worked in the kitchen garden, pulling the last of the winter vegetables, her hands steady despite the anticipation coursing through her body. Every few minutes she glanced at the sky, tracking the sun's position, counting down the hours until darkness. The other conspirators were doing the same. Iron had given each of them specific instructions. Act normal, do nothing unusual, stay calm. When the fires started, move quickly to the gathering point near the old mill at the northern edge of the property. Do not wait for anyone who is not there. Do not look back. The hardest part was the children. There were 9 children among the 43 escapees, ranging in age from 6 to 14. Iron had debated whether to include them at all. Children were unpredictable. They might cry at the wrong moment, slow down the group, give away their position. But she could not leave them behind. She could not ask parents to abandon their children, and she could not condemn another generation to grow up in chains. The youngest was a boy named Isaiah, 6 years old, small for his age, with large, serious eyes that reminded Iron of herself at that age. Isaiah's mother, a woman named Ruth, had been one of the first to commit to the escape. She had told Iron that she would rather die free than live another day as a slave. She wanted her son to know what freedom felt like, even if it was only for a few hours before they were caught. Iron had promised Ruth that they would not be caught. She intended to keep that promise. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Iron performed her tasks mechanically, her mind running through the plan again and again, looking for weaknesses she might have missed. She had prepared for many contingencies, weather, injuries, unexpected patrols, but she knew that something would go wrong. Something always went wrong. The question was whether she could adapt quickly enough to survive it. At 4:00 in the afternoon, the winter sun began to set. By 5:30, full darkness had fallen. The enslaved workers returned to their cabins for the evening meal, a meager portion of cornmeal and salt pork, never enough to satisfy hunger, but all they would receive until morning. Iron ate slowly, forcing herself to consume every bite. She would need her strength tonight. When she finished, she sat in the corner of her cabin and waited. The other occupants, two older women who were not part of the escape, settled onto their pallets and fell asleep. Iron remained motionless, listening to the sounds of the plantation settling into night. At 11:30, she rose silently and slipped out of the cabin. The night was cold and clear, a half-moon providing just enough light to navigate by. Iron moved through the slave quarters like a shadow, pausing at predetermined cabins to signal those who were waiting. One by one, small groups began making their way toward the gathering point. They moved in silence, staying low, avoiding the main paths where they might be spotted. Iron did not join them immediately. She had other business first. She made her way to the main house, staying in the shadows, watching for movement. The overseer's cabin showed a dim light through the window, probably Thomas Garrett drinking himself to sleep, as he did most nights. The main house was dark except for a single lamp in Randolph Whitmore's study. The plantation owner often worked late, reviewing accounts and correspondence. Iron circled the house until she found the position she had scouted weeks earlier, a ground-floor window leading to a storage room. The window had a broken latch that no one had bothered to repair. She eased it open and climbed inside. The storage room was filled with household supplies, linens, cleaning materials, spare furniture. Iron moved through it carefully, making no sound until she reached the door to the main